Hello and welcome back to episode 14 of Red Brick Recap. I'm joined once again by my awesome co-host Ted. Ted, how are we doing today?
Doing all right. I just want to start off really quick. I owe a big apology to Tim Albin. I last week, as I'm sure many of our listeners know, I was kind of saying that Chuck Martin was robbed of Coach of the Year, but I think Tim Albin proved that I was way off base and absolutely outcoached Coach Martin in the game, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. But Tim Albin, 100% deserved MAC Coach of the Year, but am glad to see him not in the MAC anymore.
Yeah, that was kind of a surreal situation, which you can go more in depth in a second, but kind of dealing with the fallout of the MAC loss. And then, I think we were still watching like replays on TV. And then the report came out that Albin was considering going to Charlotte. And everyone that I was talking to was like, okay, whatever, weird, like kind of a weird link, but, riding the high off the championship game, maybe just exploring offers. And then I think it was before the team had even gotten back to Athens where something was posted that he was going to take this Charlotte job because there was no videos of him at any of the post-game stuff in Oxford. And just to watch that kind of situation go down in real time was reminiscent of, like, remember that the Texas A&M baseball coach who to go to Texas and then like 4 hours later signed on at Texas. It kind of reminded me of that, of just the absolute insanity that breaks out once these conference championship games end. And whether that's the coaching portal or the coaching carousel or the transfer portal, which we're also going to go into very in depth today. But yeah, it just kind of all exploded within that like 4 to 5 hours after the game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, right? It kind of looks like a lateral move. It's like, okay, you won your conference championship, and now you're going to the AAC, which, in our opinion, the AAC is like kind of a step below the MAC, but in everybody's eyes, it's another Group of 5 school. Like, they're coming off a really bad year with Biff Poggi at the head. So you look at it and you're like, okay, it's a lateral move, right? Like this seems odd. But then you kind of dive into the specifics of it, and it's like, okay, he's getting paid twice as much as what he's getting at Ohio. And I mean, we know, and again, we'll talk about this later, but we know more than anything, money talks. Money is the end all be all. And I mean, I think that he probably knows that Ohio is going to get hit tough by the transfer portal. This was a team last year that had a lot of guys come in, but there was still a decent amount of familiarity. But I think this year, Ohio, like Miami, is going to be hit hard by the transfer portal.
Yeah, I mean, we'll dive into that in a second, but let's stick with the sports that are in season and playing right now before we start diving into transfer portal stuff. We'll start with women's basketball. Huge historic win over Dayton last week. We talked about it when it took place several hours after we'd finished recording, so obviously we didn't get a chance to talk about it. But really impressive win, 60-43. Felt like it was kind of a blowout throughout most of the game. Like going into the fourth quarter, it was a 16-point lead. Dayton kind of fought back in, but never really looked like fully competing at the end of the game. And they held a 20-point advantage for most of the third quarter, or second quarter, third quarter, I think. I'd have to double check, but really impressive game. Obviously, we talk about her every week at this point. Angelina Gonzalez led the team with 27, another insane performance. And just really good all-around win over a Dayton team that's, as we talked about last week, like going to be pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have the numbers right here. So Angelina Gonzalez, we talk about her as a kind of spark plug off the bench. Today she started. Last game she started. They moved Nadia Hooterhold to the bench. She only played 4 minutes in that game, which is kind of strange because she's been a really nice contributor for the Redhawks. But Gonzalez stepped in and started. And she was there were only 2 Redhawks that were in double digits, and of course Gonzalez was one of them. Shout out Katie Richardson for being the other one. This was not your stereotypical like Amber Treader game, right? Only 4 points, 5 rebounds. She had 4 fouls and 3 assists. Like that's not your typical Amber Treader game. And she only played 22 minutes. So, I think I think Coach Fox is really smart with how he ran his lineups in this game. He definitely went to people who was working or went with people who were working. I mean, Katie Richardson had 30, 32 minutes. I mean, I think that's a season high for her. And then again, we talk about Angelina Gonzalez every week, but she was fantastic. 27 points, 50% from 3-point line. She was 11 of 18 from the floor, 6 rebounds, 2 assists, a block, a steal, and for her amazing performance against Dayton, she was named the MAC Player of the Week for women's basketball,
Yeah.
which is the first time in a long time that I think we've had a women's basketball player win MAC Player of the Week.
Yeah, that's a huge achievement. Just going back to Amber Treader, I think she, if I remember correctly, was in foul trouble for a lot of the game. So I think that kind of contributed to why she wasn't on the floor a ton. But yeah, MAC Player of the Week, I think we swept that with Suter on the other side.
Yeah, Suter was MAC Co-Player of the Week, exactly.
Okay, so almost a sweep,
almost a sweep,
but still really impressive nonetheless. Speaking of men's basketball, I just want to shout out everyone at Riverfront, especially Tim and everyone I've worked with so far for giving me the chance to go cover that game at Assembly Hall. That's a bucket list item that I can now say for the rest of my life. I got to cover a game at Assembly Hall. Incredible experience. Everyone at Indiana could not have been nicer, especially the poor lady who had to direct me to my seat because I had never been there, and that arena is confusing as all heck. Yeah, I know. I got there 2.5 hours before tip. I'm sitting there and I got myself a chicken sandwich. I'm sitting in the front row because my my seat said section K, row 1, seat 5. So I was like, okay, cool. I'll go to section K, row 1, seat 5 in the normal fan section. Sitting there with my laptop, happy as Larry, and she walks up and is like, yeah, this is not your seat. You're up there. So shout out to her for being as nice as possible to the idiot kid who didn't know where he was supposed to go. And yeah, you just shout out everyone at Indiana for making that a really cool experience. Obviously, the game itself could have gone a little bit better. I don't know, for especially that first half, it felt like we were competing and really had a chance to kind of knock this Indiana team out. And we kind of missed the killer blow or the killer shot that really could have swung the tide in Miami's favor. Because trailing by 3 at halftime, and for most of the first 5 minutes, it looked like Miami was 1 or 2 big shots away from kind of taking that step towards maybe pulling off an upset.
Yeah, I think the final score definitely does not indicate how close this game was, especially if you were watching at home, you know just how close this game is. And I mean, Miami started out the game they were down 13-3 at the first media timeout. They started out extremely cold, and then after that timeout, I don't know what Travis said to them or what happened, but they just went on an absolute tear and brought it back within 3 points or something like that. But yeah, on the broadcast, because I ended up going to Assembly Hall like you did, but on the broadcast they kept saying every time Indiana would make a run, Miami would respond with a run their own right back. I felt like every couple minutes there's an 8-0 run by Indiana, then followed up by an 8-0 run by Miami, and the issue was for Miami at about the 10-minute mark of the second half is when they stopped scoring.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lid upon lid upon lid on that basket, and Miami just could not. They couldn't find a way to get it off, and they couldn't. And again, that sunk them, because obviously, look, Indiana's not going to stay quiet for long, and if you're battling where it was pretty much it was shot for shot, really, it was like Indiana would come down and make a shot, Miami would come down and make a shot, Indiana would miss, Miami would miss. It was a lot of repetition, a lot of parity on both sides. But when you're not making shots, Indiana is a good enough team to be able to to start to pull away, and they did at the end there. But again, game was a lot closer than the final score indicates.
Yeah, I think they were kind of a sleeping giant for most of that first half, and definitely that first period in the second half. But I mean, if you're looking at their stats on the game, they were incredibly efficient, especially inside the arc, getting to the rim. We talked about it a little bit before the game, but Oumar Ballo had a monster game, 14 points, 18 rebounds on like 83% from the field. He was kind of the X factor, especially during those stretches where Indiana did start to pull away. And if for whatever reason he wasn't there, then they had the outside threat of guys like Miles Rice and Trey Galloway, who stepped up and made some huge threes for them. And Malik Reneau also. I mean, he led the game in scoring with 19. Not as great efficiency wise, didn't really get going from beyond the arc, but still kind of gave them that third or fourth option where if one thing wasn't working for them, and clearly the emphasis was to try and get the ball into the paint, then they had other ways to score, which I don't think Miami did in this game. I don't want to say they don't have, but I mean, we've seen it a couple times now where Miami gets into these cold stretches and just kind of struggles to find a way to get offense going.
Yeah, and if you just want to look at the box score, it doesn't help when, Elmer, your guy who's been hot as of late, it doesn't help when he goes 4 of 13. Suter was 2 of 10. Kraft was 2 of 11. Coop was 0 of 5. The only two people that had an above 50% from the floor was Luke Skaljak, who's right at 50, and then Brant Byers, who was 3 of 4. And Byers, one of his threes came in garbage time at that point. Yeah. So, I'll count him as 2 of 3, which is still over 50%, but you can't have that. You can't have all 3 of your star scorers go cold on the same night. Man, it's frustrating to look at because Antoine Woolfolk only played 18 minutes. He was in a lot of foul trouble early. And then same thing for Reese Potter. He fouled out of the game. He was in foul trouble. And that's what's going to happen when you play a really talented front court in Oumar Ballo and Mackenzie Mbako. And look, for all things considered, they did great on Mbako. He was 2 of 7. He only had 4 points. He only had 4 rebounds. He had 3 fouls. And you kind of look at it and you go, okay, you know what? Small victory. But then you look at the rest of the starters and all of them scored in double digits.
Yeah, I think there's stuff to work out offensively for Miami. And I think defensively, like you said, I think they were really good in a lot of ways. I'll get into that in a second. But just looking at the second half slash line for percentages, 7 for 30 from field goals, 4 for 16 from 3. That's not going to cut it, especially at a place like Assembly Hall where it's loud. When teams get on a run, the crowd gets behind them. You needed to find a way to get a shot to drop. And I don't want to say getting concerning, but it's getting to a point where it's in the back of my mind where when these runs happen, do we have the X factor? Do we have the guy we can go to and say, go get us a bucket? I think this was kind of the same thing that happened last year in a way, where Darwishi Hunter was asked to be the guy to go get shots to fall when the team would fall into this kind of rut. And we saw what happened when that didn't happen. They'd, go on scoreless runs, allowing the other team to kind of fight back and build out a steady lead. And I think the same thing happened on Friday, where we asked Suter or Kraft to go be the guy and go get us a bucket. And for whatever reason, it's just not happening yet. But on defense, it was, especially the first half, was super impressive. I don't remember the exact turnover numbers, but Indiana had double the amount of turnovers that Miami did. And they looked really sloppy with the ball at times. Like, that was the main reason Indiana was kind of let Miami back into the game. Like, I think it was like back-to-back possessions. They just threw the ball away on inbounds and then threw the ball away in the backcourt, giving Miami like 6 easy points. And I mean, Indiana is going to be a good team. They're incredibly talented. And I know Indiana fans are a little skeptical about Mike Woodson's credentials as their head coach, but for all intents and purposes, he's still one of the top coaches in the country. So this is going to be a team that's competing for the Big Ten and competing for it, maybe if not a conference title, an at-large bid to the NCAA tournament. So to compete with them for as long as Miami did is an impressive sign and a really green flag coming into a run of games that we said last week can be really beneficial for their confidence. But yeah, I think there's, as we talk about, there's some things that definitely need to get cleaned up on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. You towards the end there, you mentioned, these are big games for their confidence. And I think there are no moral victories in basketball. Obviously, you're not going to make the NCAA tournament with moral victories. But I think if you're Miami, you can take away things positive that you did in both this game and the Michigan game is they can force a lot of turnovers. If they are and this is something that they mentioned after the Wright State loss. If they are connected on the defensive end, they can be a really, really good defensive team. And I think we saw that for a good portion of the first half, and even a decent portion in the second half, is when they're connected and they're playing with each other and they're playing through each other and they're talking on defense and they're sliding and they're making good defensive adjustments, they can be a really good basketball team. And look, I mean, when you get down 13-3 in the first couple of minutes of the game, like that's really hard to come back from mentally, right? It's like, okay, it's now, it's the first 4-6 minutes of the game and you just got run off the court. How do you respond to that? And they responded by locking down on defense and finally starting to make shots. And the thing that's going to carry them in the MAC is their defensive ability. And they have to remember that. They have to remember that this team it's a defensive identity team first. It shouldn't be a scoring first team. It's a defensive mentality because look, in the MAC, every possession is crucial, and the pace of play in the MAC is a lot slower than it is in, say, the Big Ten. So every possession is going to be crucial. So the more possessions you can stop and the more possessions you're able to, the more possessions you're able to keep the other team from scoring, you're going to have a much easier time winning games, especially if you're not making shots on the other end.
Yeah. I also, like you said, like when we kind of got run off the court there in that first couple minutes, that 13-3 run, I have to keep reminding myself of how young and frankly inexperienced that this team is as a collective. Like,
yeah,
that's Assembly Hall, maybe the largest arena some of these guys playing in their entire careers. Like, that's an 18,000 seater, and it is loud, and it is a tough place to play. And that's not an indictment of any of Miami's players. It's just a statement of fact that Indiana's arena is one of the toughest places to play in the country. It could rival NBA arenas for the size and noise that it generates. And for a team that has guys like Elmer and Ipsaro coming back after one season of college basketball, guys like Skaljak and Byers, who is like their 8th career game. And then you got like even Cam Kraft, who's been in college basketball for a while. He hasn't played in so long because of injury trouble. So you have these guys that haven't played in environments like this and haven't played a ton of college basketball as a whole. And to see them kind of be resilient in that fashion was really encouraging, especially, as you said, when we get into MAC play, where these games start to have significant meaning, especially if Miami does want to take that next step and start competing for the conference title, which I think is why that game against Air Force, Coach Steele talks about it after, but that game against Air Forces was so important because it kind of exposed them to what it's like to play in the MAC. Obviously not exactly the same, but Air Force plays the game at a snail's pace. It felt like every possession was going down to the last 4 or 5 seconds of the shot clock. If you can prove that you can battle for 25 seconds on the defensive end for as long as they did, and where they were able to kind of create those runs to jump out to that lead, you're going to be able to compete with anyone in the MAC. And then who knows from there, but it's really encouraging to see that this team make those strides and show that resilience, especially with some of the inexperience that's popping up.
Yeah, I think from, most of the games that they've played, they're able to take away, again, I don't like using the term moral victory, but they're able to take away certain things that they can make sure that they're able to translate into MAC play, right? Like we look at the Wright State game. Wright State plays a very fast-paced style of offense, which means, you're going to have to get back on when, if they put a bucket in, you're going to have to kind of respond to them by playing at their pace. And I think you take away from that game, okay, we can play at a fast pace if we need to. We're able to kind of keep up with that. Obviously, the result doesn't show that, but they were in it. They were really in it right until that, the last 4 minutes of the game. For Eastern Shore, Maryland Eastern Shore, I think it was one of those things where it's like, okay, we got to remember that we can't play down to the level of our opponent. We have to play like within ourselves. Michigan and Indiana, you take away, like, we were in it. We can force a lot of turnovers. We're right there. And then Siena and Mercer, it's like Siena, it was a close game for a while, and then Mercer was close. It was close until the last buzzer. I mean, it was a 3-point win for Miami. So you can take away victories from that, and saying, okay, we've been there when the games get tough, and we need to pull out a win, and they were able to do that. And then, of course, like you said, Air Force. I mean, Air Force plays at probably one of the slowest paces in the country, and I actually may look that up here in a second. But there are a lot of positives to take away from a couple of these, from most of, if not all of these games, and the hope is that later on, come MAC play, these things that we've kind of been talking about, saying, okay, maybe this needs to improve here and there, they start to show, and they start to show that they've been worked on and improved upon, and things of that nature. But I want to give a big shout out. Well, I guess two big shout outs. First of all, we mentioned it briefly, but Peter Suter was MAC co-player of the week for men's basketball. He, of course, in that Air Force game, career high 42 points. That was the most ever by a Miami player at Millett Hall, sixth highest all time, and the largest amount scored since Wally Zerbiak in 1999 when he scored 43. On the week, he averaged 25.5 points, 3.4 rebounds, 2 steals, 1.5 assists, and half a block. That's a pretty damn good stat line, if I do say so myself. And then again, we briefly mentioned it, but in his eighth career game ever, Luke Skaljak comes off the bench and leads Miami in scoring with 14 points. And there was a stretch where I think he went on an 8-0 run by himself or something like that.
Yeah.
He was cooking. And we talked about it in the podcast before. Who's going to be the guy to come off the bench and lead that second unit in scoring? You mentioned it, the second unit has trouble scoring. They have trouble finding that leader. And maybe Luke was listening to the podcast because he said, okay, let me do it. And he does it against probably the toughest opponent he'll face all year.
Yeah.
And he came out and looked confident. He looked strong in his shots. There was not a point where I think he hesitated at all with any of his shots. And he looked good. And it sucks that he missed a shot for the first time in a month.
Yeah.
And they said that on the broadcast, when he had the ball and he made his first shot, they're like, Luke Skaljak hasn't missed a shot in a month or something like that. But this is what I wanted to see from him, right? This is what we wanted to see from him. We wanted to see him be more aggressive and get to his spots and get to his shots. And he looked very, very good.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what his role turns out to be, because we kind of saw it last year where guys would pop up and have one game where they go for 15 to 18 and then just kind of go back to the 5 to 6 a game kind of stuff. But if this can be a consistent output for a guy on the bench that provides that kind of perimeter shooting that has been missing on the second unit at times, that changes Miami's game plan, because then you don't have to rely on the first 5 to score all of the points. You don't have to have one of them on the floor to kind of generate that offense. It allows you to kind of give those guys more of a rest. Kind of want to pivot here and talk briefly about just a little KenPom check-in. I think Miami sits, I have it now, Miami's sitting 171st in the country in the KenPom. I think they started in the mid 220s. So that's a 50-point jump in the first 8 games of the season. If I'm reading this right, we're third in the MAC. Ohio and Kent State are still ahead of us. But Miami's luck rating is 42nd in the country. I don't know how that's calculated, and I'm not entirely sure what it goes into a luck rating, but that puts them in the top 50 in the country in whatever is decided as luck. And I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that. It feels like Miami's wins have been pretty standard. It hasn't been a ton of luck involved, especially when Miami gets going from 3. But just thought that was an interesting tidbit to keep an eye on, is what that luck rating looks like as we get further on in the season.
Yeah, from what I'm seeing, it's basically just the difference between actual performance and expected performance. This Reddit user says that the simplest way to think about it, we know a quarter should flip heads 50% of the time. If you flip a quarter 100 times and get 60 heads, that quarter is lucky per se, because, so I think it's something like that, where it's Miami is expected to be here on play, but they're actually here. And hopefully it's not necessarily luck. Hopefully it's just them actually playing very well. But who knows? And then just a note about Air Force, because I did look it up. Air Force is third to last in pace of play. In the country, they are 362 out of 364, which is it's just you are in for a really, really long game. And then actually, thing to note as this team is coming up, Vermont is 345 out of 364 in the nation. So they are another slow team, and that could be another game where Miami has to kind of grind out a win. But we will see. Good. I like the KenPom check-in. I think we should make that a regular thing every couple of weeks.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the Vermont game coming up. I want to talk briefly about this run of games that we have before we hit MAC play against Buffalo on January 4th. We have 4 games. Looking at them, this should be at least 3 wins out of 4. Vermont, anything can happen in that game. We saw what happened last year. Miami wasn't expected to win that game, and a Darwishi Hunter 3 kind of swung the tie in Miami's favor to win the game. I'll never forget watching that game. I think it was the day before Thanksgiving. Or
no, that was it was like around Christmas.
I know I was already home for it. Is what I was.
I think it was this. I want to say it was like December 21st or 22nd, because I remember making a win graphic for the basketball team and they all had like Santa hats on.
Yeah, well, I'll go with you. That sounds about right. But whatever reason, I was at home watching it with my parents, and they thought like something had like blown up in the kitchen because I started screaming my head off. But yeah, hopefully a repeat performance this year. But yeah, I mean, looking at like Defiance, I think we played last year and won by a pretty significant amount. Sacred Heart, I don't know if we played, but Sacred Heart should be a winnable game. And Bethany, to be honest, I don't know much about any of these 3 teams, but on paper, it sounds like Miami should win these games pretty comfortably.
Yeah, it definitely is going to be one of those. It's definitely going to be one of those stretches where if Miami is anything less than 3-1, you count it as kind of a disappointment. It's no shot at any of these teams, but you kind of look at the schedule and you're like, all right, well, these were scheduled to be probably some tune-up games. Going into MAC play. I would love to see them go 4-0, but at the very least, knock on wood, hopefully they can go 3-1. But before we move on, I do want to ask a question. And this is not to poo-poo on anyone, but is it time to get a little worried about the over-reliance on the 3 ball, and specifically, is it time to get worried about Cam Kraft's three ball performance?
I want to say no, but the hard stats are telling a different story. Yeah, what's he shooting? 36%. Yeah. It's still not terrible, but the last couple games have been bad. Yeah, 1 for 6, 1 for 6, and 0 for 3. I wouldn't say that's necessarily over reliance yet. I think it's just a cold stretch, and we saw last year that our scorers went through that, and it didn't necessarily kill our offensive performance. And there were guys that stepped up. As long as one person is finding their stroke on a given night, I think we'll be okay in most games, as long as we're not giving up crazy amounts on the other end. Because we saw it in the Air Force game. Suter had 42, Kraft had 0. And we saw it, both guys put in performances against Indiana, but then you have guys like Skaljak step up, and Elmer, I still think, finished with 11. So over-reliance, no, because I think it's part of what Steele's trying to do. He's trying to build this identity that this is a team that shoots threes. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily over-reliance yet, especially when our field goal percentage from inside the arc isn't necessarily super impressive either, only sitting around 45%. So I think in a lot of games you're going to need the 3 to kind of be that weapon. But yeah, I mean, obviously it's not an ideal start for some guys, but I'm not super worried yet. If we get another 4 or 5 games in and this is still something we're talking about, then I'm going to start to question it. But for now, I'm not super stressed about it yet.
Yeah, the only reason I ask, and again, it's not to single out Kraft because everybody is struggling with the three. I could have named a bunch of different guys who are struggling with the three ball, and at least for us, we kind of we've said aloud that, like, especially on this podcast, that we believe Cam Kraft can be the MAC Player of the Year. But it definitely seems like when he struggles outside of like the outside of the Air Force game, because everybody struggled in that game except for Suter, but it kind of feels like when he struggles, everyone else struggles. And then the only reason I said over reliance on three is in their last 5 games, Miami as a team has shot 34%, 45 against Air Force, 20% against Mercer, 31% against Siena, and 34% against Michigan. I mean, those numbers are okay outside of the Mercer game. I wonder, like, I know that's what Steele's identity. I know this is why Steele recruited the guys that he recruited. He wants to shoot a lot of threes. I just wonder, like, how is this going to translate over to the MAC when possessions are so far and few in between? And it's like if you're hucking up a three, if you're not shooting the ball well from 3-point land, and you're not going to be able to get another possession for another 30 seconds. To me, it's like you're right. It's definitely not. It's not anything to be worried about right now. But I think it's something that, like, we can track going on, especially throughout the season, especially if Miami were to start to struggle.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it also depends on, like, that pace of play and how the game turns out. Because Miami proved it last year that they can win in a track race and they can win in the half court. Because they won games where they scored 80 plus points, like the Central Michigan game. They scored 88 last year. 2 weeks later, they played Eastern Michigan and won 52-37. Like, this team can adjust to the pace of play, and obviously a different group than last year. But even this year, like, I think the pace of plays have been drastically different in some of the games, and they've still shown they can adapt and put in decent performances. Obviously, it's still early. We're only 8 games in, and I don't want to take the Michigan and Indiana games out, but I think you take them with a grain of salt, because in both of those games, they competed and were within 5 or 6 points for a lot of the first half and even a bit of the second half, and then the late run kind of took them out. But I'm more optimistic than I have been in previous seasons coming into this run of games leading into the MAC play. And once we get into MAC play, I think I'll have a much clearer idea of my full opinion on that. But I want to switch gears because we're getting to our time, or I'm just keeping an eye on the time. I want to do a brief hockey update because the performances were better this weekend. Still 0-2, so not awesome, but 5-4 against North Dakota, and kind of gave up a late comeback in that game to drop that one. And then 4-2. I mean, it's not great. It's still 2 losses, but it's not 8-1. It's not 7-2. So it's progress.
I would somewhat disagree with that due to the fact that in both games they had the lead, and then they let them go on a run in a period, which ends up losing them the game.
Yeah.
Obviously, yes, it's great that the scores indicate that it's a lot closer. Because you're right, it's not 8-1, it's not 7-2. However, at least in the North Dakota game, the first game, Miami had a 4-2 lead going into the third period.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was like, I mean, it wasn't until like 6 minutes left it wasn't until 6 minutes left when North Dakota got that first goal. And then it's like, okay, 6 minutes left, they get that third goal, you're still up 1. And then it's 2 minutes left, they tie the game. And then it's 30 seconds left and they win the game.
Yeah.
That's something, I mean, they did the exact same thing last year. Like I remember being at Goggin for a game, and it ended up going into overtime. But it was Miami was up. They came back, or Miami was up. North Dakota came back, and then they ended up winning in overtime. So yes, like the scores indicate that it was better, but overall, it's kind of oh, I mean, they blew two leads.
Yeah. I also just wanted a quick shout out Sasha Boisvert, Blackhawks guy. Love to see him. Obviously, it sucks to see him score against the Redhawks, but it is cool to see him score just in general. So cool to see that 18th overall pick in 2024. So seeing him on the ice and performing is cool to see. Selfishly, obviously, against the Redhawks. So grain of salt there. Ted, I think we've avoided it long enough. I think we have to talk about it.
Okay, fine.
I don't know if I necessarily want to either, but I think it's about time we address the elephant in the room. Saturday, I honestly don't know where to start. 38-3 loss at Ford Field in the MAC championship game against the Ohio Bobcats. It just felt like a gut punch from like the first 5 minutes of the game. And it just never felt like Miami truly could get a foothold in this one.
Yeah, this is. I've been thinking about this all week to try to figure out how to, phrase this kind of politely. First of all, we got our butts whooped. I think Miami came in thinking that they were going to do the same thing that they did at Yager Stadium, where they were going to have control of the game. I think you saw that when on the first play of the game, they tried to hit a deep shot to, I think was it Reggie Virgil or Javon Tracy?
I think it was Virgil.
They tried to hit Virgil on a deep shot, and Gabbert threw it out of bounds. And I kind of sat there and I was like, that ball wasn't even close. And I was like, that doesn't give me a good taste in my mouth. But then it was like, okay, big play to Javon Tracy, then another big play to Javon Tracy. Ball goes out of Tracy's hands, and I'm like, oh no, that's gonna be. Or no, it didn't hit him in the hands. I'm thinking of the other time that happened. It was intended for Tracy, tipped, and then Virgil's standing right there, and he catches it. And I'm like, okay, you know what? We're moving the ball. This is a good thing. Like we're doing really well. And then it's like 3rd and 8 or something like that. And Tracy could have had the first down, maybe if he just kind of kept going upfield, but instead he turned back and tried to make another defender miss on that like first drive. And then the moment that I knew Miami was going to be in a lot of trouble, I just didn't know how much trouble. The moment that I think any momentum that Miami ever was going to have was sucked out is when they kicked the field goal instead of going for it on 4th and 1. I get it. It's the MAC championship game. You want to take as many points as possible, but this is a rivalry game. Again, it's the MAC championship. I mean, they left 4 points on the table, and it's fourth. It was 4th and 1, and
Yeah.
it wasn't like Ohio's defense was like stopping the run. I mean, Keon Mosey had a couple of runs that were positive gains. So it was kind of like we expect this like hard-nosed style of football from Miami. Miami, look, all things considered, they were brutal on 3rd down. They were they were the 11th out of 12 teams in the MAC on 3rd down conversion rates. How you want to know how high they were on 4th down conversion rates? They were like 4th in the MAC in conversion on 4th down. And for me, sitting there watching it, it's like, okay, like go for it. It's 4th and a half a yard.
Yeah.
Like you can get that, and it just sucked any momentum they had out of the offense. And then, look, I'm going to give a lot of credit to Parker Navarro and Anthony Tyus here. They were just unstoppable. And I mean, what did we say? Miami needed to make Navarro throw the ball. Navarro threw the ball and looked really, really confident and really strong with his passes when he was throwing the ball. So Timothy Chalamet knows ball, and that's kind of all I'll say about that.
Timothy Chalamet does indeed know ball, and I'm heartbroken that he does, especially in this case. Yeah, Navarro, I talked about it at length before the game. In the first meeting between the two, he was basically ineffective. I think he only threw for about 80 yards on like 40% completion, couldn't really move the ball on the ground either. Clearly, he saw something on film, and made the adjustments he needed to, because he had 300 total yards, 4 total touchdowns, 5 yards per carry, like almost 10 yards per completion. Everything you could want in your quarterback, he did, and did effectively, and looked poised and confident doing it in a way that we just did not see at Jaeger in October. So full credit to him, fully deserved MVP. Yeah, and Anthony Tyus too. I talked about him too. If you can kind of slow him down, then Miami's defense would stand a fighting chance. Obviously, we saw that did not happen. Another 5 yards per carry and a touchdown. Yeah, we talked about it. If Miami has trouble in the run game, then it's trouble the rest of the way. And we talked about what would happen if Miami was playing from behind. Miami played from behind and really could not get anything going passing wise, running wise, special teams wise, just full domination in a way that we haven't seen from a Miami opponent since the Notre Dame game. And it was tough. It's the way it goes sometimes. Full credit to OU. They played one hell of a ball game. What was it? Like, especially defensively, I think it was like 4 TFLs, a couple sacks. They had the interception, but just all around, it just never felt like Miami stood a chance. And I think part of that is going back to that 4th down you talked about, where Miami goes for it there and gets it. That sets a tone that Miami's going to be aggressive and they're going to fight for this game. That kind of felt like Chuck Martin saying, we're going to play conservative. We're going to play to stay in this ball game because we think Ohio's got something different this time around. And they did. To their credit, they looked like a completely different team. Full credit to the coaches over there because they were dominant. Yeah, it was a classy, dominant win. And obviously, we're disappointed that it's Ohio, but I feel like I would have been more disappointed if it was a close, like, overtime loss than this, where it just kind of felt like it was inevitable from the first, like, 15 minutes of play.
Yeah, I don't know if there's much else to be said. I think it was a really, really well coached game by Tim Albin. There was a really, really good game plan. The guys executed it really well, and Miami got they got their stuff kicked in, to say it politely. Yeah, and it's a tough way for some of these guys to end their Miami careers, which we'll kind of get into, but it's kind of a tough end for, say, Brett Gabbert if he doesn't play in the bowl game, or Matt Salopek if he doesn't play in the bowl game. I mean, that's a really tough way to end their careers.
Yeah, credit to the seniors for all they've put in for Miami. Also, I don't know what's going on outside. I think someone's like chainsawing something on my sidewalk. So sorry for that background noise. I'm not really sure how to get rid of that. One more game. Colorado State in the Arizona Bowl. Maybe I know ball too. I called the Arizona Bowl from the beginning. I thought it was going to be that or Detroit, and ended up being somewhat right. This Colorado State team had an interesting season, as far as I can tell. Obviously, I didn't watch them a ton, but 6-1 in the conference, 8-4 overall, and they played a really tough non-conference. They played Texas, got smoked. I remember all the talk about that Colorado game and the build up to that, and seeing some of that somewhere. Ended up losing 28-9, and then lost to. But they ran the table in their conference, and they beat some good teams in the process. Like, beat Utah State, lost to Fresno State. That was kind of a weird one. Beat Wyoming, beat Nevada. Like, this is a good football team with some really good players. Their quarterback, I'm going to find his name now, stands out as one of those guys who, like, again, I'm going to talk about the college football video game again, but I've come across him in that game, and he's pretty solid in that. What's his name? Braden Fowler Nicolosi, 13 touchdowns, seven picks, decent season running the ball. They had almost a 1,000-yard rusher in Avery Morrow, so that's going to be someone to keep an eye on too. Just, again, you stop the run and get the lead. It's two different teams. If Miami has the lead and is able to stop the run, they look like one of the best teams, one of the best mid-major teams in the country. If they're playing from behind and they get out of their game plan, it's a complete flip. It's a complete 180. So I'm cautiously optimistic for this game. It's a cool bowl game. We get the Snoop Dogg Bowl, the gin, like sponsored by Gin and Juice. So cool game, cool venue in Arizona. I'm gonna try and make it down there, but flights when I last looked were like $900, and I simply just don't have that to spend right now. So might be watching it from home, but it should be a fun game at the very least. It's a fun matchup. It's not a team we get to play very often in any sport, so unique matchup will be fun to watch no matter what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully Miami can finish their season on a high note. Finish their season on a high note. This is kind of a big week for the MAC, if you think about it. A lot of teams have bowl games, but I think the bigger news is the talks that NIU will leave for the Mountain West have picked up again. This could be the last iteration of the MAC as we know it, considering that UMass is joining for football only next year. But hey, if that happens, maybe they bring back divisions because I love divisions. I don't know why we got rid of them, UMass. But that's kind of big news, especially considering Mountain West just added UC Davis as another member. But why? I thought we had agreed as like a collective to not touch the MAC anymore.
Yeah, I think I don't think this is a singular move. I think the MAC's going to keep adding, whether that be a school like Western Kentucky, possibly, or in that kind of area. I saw a tweet the other day, and they wanted, like, someone suggested that Miami should go out and get like Fresno State. I was like, that's just dumb. That's just not going to happen. If it's going to happen, it's going to be a team around here. But I don't think the MAC's done. I think this is just kind of the necessity of the way the college football world is going. And speaking of bowl games, Miami will be out without a significant amount of their roster for this bowl game. We've talked about it all season, how we thought some of these guys were going to go in the portal at the end of the season. I don't think I expected it to happen before the bowl game. I thought, like, the culture of this program of like everyone coming back for one more season would kind of keep these guys around until at least after the bowl game. Obviously, that's not the case with the way the portal works and like the set time you have to enter by and blah, 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 all that nonsense. So yeah, we're going to be without two of our best offensive weapons and arguably our best defensive player outside of Salopek. We'll run through the list here, but the big one, I think the first one that jumped in was Rayon Strader, who was all MAC first team, made a case for MAC Defensive Player of the Year. And when he posted, I think like 5 or 10 offers rolled in within the first like 10 minutes because it felt like he was just immediately posting which offers he got. I know you say you got linked to Pitt. I think I saw Ole Miss just offered him too. Obviously, it's still too early in the process to know exactly where he's going, but it's going to be somewhere in the Power 5 or in the Power 4. And he deserves it. He was Miami's best corner, best defensive back, and proved he could hang with the big boys. So I think it's a move that is good for his career. It might jump him into like the NFL level maybe. And yeah, I think he proved it at Miami that he has the ability to go play at this level.
Yeah, the top 3 guys that we have on our list, Rayon Strader, Reggie Virgil, Javon Tracy, all 3 of those guys within their like, hey, I'm going to transfer. All 3 of them said this is purely so or they were like, this is because we want to try to make it to the NFL. Like we're not leaving because we don't want to stay here. We're leaving because the pro potential out of Miami it doesn't happen. The guys who stay in Miami, like, I mean, Michael Dowell, Jack Sorensen, those are guys who like were on practice squads and then released and then didn't get another opportunity. But then it's like you look at Ivan Pace Jr., who was a Miami guy, and then he transfers to Cincinnati, and now he's a huge player, a huge defensive player for the Minnesota Vikings all of a sudden. That's, I think, what some of these guys are seeing, and that's kind of the opportunity that they need to go chase. And obviously, we wish all the best for them. They'll always be Red Hawks at heart. But it sucks. It sucks that, Strader, Virgil, Tracy are gone. Another big person who just put their name in the transfer portal, Will Jados. one of our key offensive tackles. He's on his way out. Some other guys who I don't think have like a ton of offers yet are William Hardrick, who's a defensive back, T.J. Rush, who's a graduate safety, Thomas Gallagher, who's a wide receiver. He's got 3 years of eligibility left. He just put his name in the portal. And then self-proclaimed 5-star long snapper Caleb Schrader is in the portal. Those are the ones that I've officially seen just through Twitter and through 247 Sports. But yeah, like you mentioned, Ryan Schrader, I have him linked to Pitt. I know he got offered by Pitt. They had a pretty good season in the ACC, and it's close to home for him.
Yeah.
So he might want to go back. I really hope he doesn't pull an Ivan Pace and go to Cincinnati. He's been the only one who's been offered by Cincinnati that I've seen. So please don't do that, Ryan. That would suck. That would break our hearts again.
That would be really not fun.
And then Reggie Virgil, he's from Florida, and I know he has visits lined up to Florida and FSU. I've seen Billy Napier really, really wants Reggie Virgil. So I think Virgil's probably going to get a handsome sum of money to go play for Napier. So that's my official prediction for Reggie Virgil. I think he goes to Florida. And then Javon Tracy, I haven't seen him linked to anywhere. I personally just have him linked to Indiana because he is from Indiana. Like, his older brother Tyrone Tracy went to Purdue. So those boys kind of like to stay in state. But he's been offered by Indiana, Purdue, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma. Like, I mean, the list goes on and on. If I had to choose a place for Javon Tracy, I would probably say Indiana or Purdue, just because it makes the most sense in terms of like just overall like Indiana. Who knows where their wide receivers are going to go, and then Purdue just needs talent at this point. But yeah,
Purdue is going to be a someone to watch because of the new coach they just hired, who claims that he's getting like a ton of NIL money to kind of rebuild this program. I didn't read the full press conference yesterday, but it was the former UNLV coach who kind of built that NIL program from scratch and is now being hired to do the same thing at Purdue. So that'll be a school to watch in the coming years, especially with how close it is to Miami, and a lot of these guys being local guys may decide to stay somewhat close to home. A little bit of breaking news here. Reggie Virgil was offered Michigan has offered to Reggie Virgil. I still think he's going to go somewhere in the Floridas. I think that makes the most sense for him. And I think the SEC is kind of, when the SEC knocks, it's a different knock kind of thing. So I can definitely see that. Tracy, I mean, again, it's too early to say where we think like we have official predictions, but I think the Big Ten would be a great landing spot for him. I think he fits what a lot of offenses are trying to do. I personally would love to see him in the Indiana offense. So I'm going to put that one down as my prediction, but I think he would thrive in that offense. And then we talked, you mentioned it briefly, but the one that really hurts is Will Jadez, and the fact that pieces of this offensive line that struggled at times, but have also been as a whole a really strong, cohesive unit, and to not get obviously we're never going to get every single piece back, but to kind of see that fall apart is starting to hurt a little bit. And we want to talk about some people that we have received Miami offers, because there's quite a few that I've seen so far. Coy Beasley is one, Purdue. A transfer, Reese Atkins from UCF, 6'6" tight end, received a Miami offer. Obviously, these are all offers, and there's no way to tell whether or not these guys are going to actually accept a transfer offer here, but Miami's been super active in the portal and kind of have to be in order to compete at this level and stay at this level. And I mean, it seems like every 20 minutes I'm seeing another Miami OH offer to guys in the Power Four, guys at the JUCO level. So we're searching high and low. I'm excited. I think that as sad as it is that we're kind of moving on from this era of Miami football that has been so successful, I think it is it's always going to be exciting to see what this team's going to be like, especially with this new era of transfer portals with guys coming in from all over the country. So it's something to keep an eye on. Something we're going to monitor, especially now that we kind of get a break from school and can kind of look at this a little bit more. Yeah, I think it'll be fun to watch, and I know that Miami's been super active in the portal. So
Yeah, it's not just a Miami thing too. There are a lot of guys from the MAC who are in the transfer portal. Just specifically, like some names that we may have talked about throughout the year. Caden Semenza, MAC Freshman of the Year, he decided to opt out. And I like this tweet by Phil Friend. And this is kind of something that we all have to kind of keep in mind with this, but. The unfortunate reality now is that when you have a MAC Freshman of the Year, he's gone. Trying to thread the needle and recruit a quarterback that will peak his senior year, but also be really good in said year, but not good enough to transfer before then, is basically impossible in this new era. And I feel like that really hits the nail on the head here. Is like it feels like when you're going to be recruiting these players from now on, you're going to be recruiting for a trial run for a year, right? Like. I think every coach is knowing that they may only get some of these guys for about a year, so it's really tough. But again, some names we mentioned from Bowling Green, Joseph Sipp Jr. His name is in the portal. Terrion Stewart, his name is in the portal. Those are big losses for a team that just missed out on the MAC championship game. I don't know if Ohio doesn't have anybody in the portal as of right now, which makes sense.
right. Tanner Koziel, the tight end from Ball State, just committed to Louisville.
Oh, wow.
That's according to On3. I will see if that actually works out to be the case. But, I mean, he was the top target for Samanza. So for Ball State to lose both of their arguably best offensive players is incredibly tough.
Joe Labus from Central Michigan, 4-star QB. He's in the portal.
I want to correct myself here. Tanner Koziel is not committed to Louisville, but that is what the crystal ball has him going to.
Ethan Hampton's gone.
Oh, he is? Oh, wow.
He put his name in the portal.
Koziel is now predicted at 38% to go to Illinois.
Oh, wow.
Which would be really interesting. I think that's a great fit for him.
Yeah.
Especially with Illinois kind of trying to make a push in the Big Ten. They had a good season last year. Altmaier is going to come back, allegedly. We'll see if that actually turns out to be the case. But they've always been super active in the portal. I think they've had a transfer quarterback the last 4 years. So Illinois is a good spot for him. I think he's from Illinois. He went to NAS alongside JJ McCarthy. So that'd be kind of a homecoming for him. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That tweet, I saw the same tweet and I thought about it. I was like, how lucky are we that we had Brett Gabbert for as long as we did? Because despite the injuries and despite all of the things that he's been through, I don't think there's ever a point where it even sounded like it was even a rumor that he was going to transfer.
No, he put his name into the portal.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, I don't know if you remember that, but I think it was about 2 years ago. He fully put his name into the portal. Let me look this up because I remember he withdrew. I remember it was a big thing. I remember transfer portal. I remember I interviewed him for my old podcast, kind of right after he withdrew his name.
Oh yeah, you're not kidding. Yeah, he was in.
Yeah, 2022 he entered the portal, and then 2022 in December he came back. So it was the year before last. So it was right before they went to the MAC championship the next year. But I remember interviewing him, and I was told specifically, do not ask about the transfer portal. Do not ask. Don't ask about the transfer portal. If you're gonna don't try not to ask too many questions specifically about what do you love about Miami, things like that.
Yeah.
So they were so Miami obviously was very sensitive to the fact that he almost left. So yeah, not to kind of poo-poo.
No,
but,
that was kind of before I started getting into the coverage. So,
but yeah, I remember I was in the car with a couple of my buddies. I can't remember. We must have been driving. We were driving somewhere. And I remember going through Instagram, and all of a sudden it's Brett Gabbert, and he put his name in the portal, and I just aloud I was like, no. And
Yeah.
everybody was like, what? And I was like, Gabbert put his name in the portal. And everybody was like, you're kidding.
Yeah. Well, obviously didn't leave, still stayed at Miami, 6-year guy. I think that'll be really interesting to see. I know we're kind of coming up on our team time here, so we'll end with this, but I think it'll be interesting to see how Miami handles the quarterback position next year, especially with the portal now. We talked a couple of weeks ago about maybe you bring back a guy who knows Miami pretty well, Avion Smith. He's in the portal. There's so many options from so many schools that are jumping in the portal that I think in my humble, very unprofessional, unexpert opinion, I do think Miami will kind of go back to the transfer portal to find someone, because I don't know what their confidence level is in Hessen or Max Kopp. We saw them both, and we saw Hessen at times this year, and we saw Kopp in the Cure Bowl last year, and neither looked outstanding and neither looked to be the level that Gabbert is. So I think that's a position they address in the portal. But yeah, I think the portal makes roster creation so interesting. It's going to be so interesting. I'm not going to say fun, but interesting to watch in the next couple of years, especially this year where it's going to be kind of a transition year with guys like Salopek and Gabbert leaving the program, and needs are going to need to be addressed in the portal. And I think Miami's going to be kind of forced, despite Chuck Martin's kind of old school way, to hammer the portal pretty hard.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think the portal is going to be really big. There are a lot of there are a lot of good quarterbacks in there. Low-key, I think it'd be kind of funny if they went out and got like Caden Samanza, just for funsies. But I don't think he's going to stay Mac, honestly, all things considered. But yeah, Avion Smith, I was scrolling through his Twitter just now. He doesn't have any offers, so it could be something you float by him, and say, hey, would you want to come back? Because obviously the job is not set in stone like it kind of was with Gabbert.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the hope is because look, I mean, who knows, right? Because we don't even know who's in house for Miami in terms of the quarterback position. They could have somebody who comes in, in the off season and absolutely just like shows out and like shows the coaching staff that he deserves to be the starter. But it's going to be really interesting. Like you said, it's going to be a really, really interesting couple of months leading back into the football season. But yeah, I'm excited. I wish the guys who want to transfer the best of luck. Once a Red Hawk, always a Red Hawk. And I had one more thing, but I'm forgetting, so I won't stall, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, well, we are well and truly at our time. We even ran a little bit over. But Ted, once again, a pleasure having you on. We got a big weekend of Miami sports. We got women's basketball, men's basketball, another hockey game to cover. But I think the next episode, I'll be at home. So you'll have a different set, a different look, and maybe a little bit of different coverage where I'm going to try and spend some time with my family this winter. So we'll keep everyone in the loop on what that's going to look like. But thank you all once again for listening to Red Brick Recap. We will see you all next week. Ted, any final words before we head on out?
Build the statue of Chuck Martin regardless. Build the statue.
100% agree. We'll start the the petition right here. But yeah, we will see you all next week. Same bad time, same bad channel. Have a great week, everyone, and enjoy the holidays.